My agent called it an opportunity. I called it the end of the line. The truth, I guess, was somewhere in the middle. The advance for my second book had run dry 6 months ago, and the book itself was a graveyard of false starts and deleted chapters. I was broke, creatively and literally. So when the offer came to manage a motel on a forgotten stretch of Route 66, I took it. It wasn't a career move, it was a tourniquet. The place was called the Desert Sunset Motel. Even the name felt tired. My beat-up Jetta complained the whole way, the air conditioning giving up somewhere outside of Kingman. The heat wasn't just hot, it was a physical presence, a weight on my shoulders. The landscape was brutal and beautiful in a way that made you feel small and temporary. The highway stretched out in front of me like a gray, cracked ribbon, shimmering with heat haze. There was nothing for miles in every direction but sand, rock, and the occasional skeletal-looking cactus. Then I saw it. The sign was rusted at the edges, the neon tubes spelling out, Desert Sunset, long dead, with a sad, flickering, VCANCY sign underneath. The motel itself consisted of a single long, low building painted a faded peach color, the paint peeling away in cancerous patches. To the left was a small, separate office, and behind it, a gravel lot with exactly one other vehicle, a rusted Ford pickup that looked like it had been there since the Carter administration. I pulled in, the gravel crunching loudly in the oppressive silence. A man emerged from the office before I'd even turned off the engine. He was old, thin as a rail, with skin like worn leather and tired, watery eyes that seemed to look right through me. He was wiping his hands on an oily rag. "You the new guy?" he asked. His voice was raspy, like he'd been gargling sand. "Leo, that's me, Art," he said, not offering a hand. "Keys are inside." He led me into the office. The air inside was thick with the smell of stale cigarette smoke, dust, and something else, something faintly chemical, like old cleaning supplies. A cheap oscillating fan on the counter did little more than push the hot air around. Art slid a heavy ring of keys across the worn linoleum counter. There were maybe a dozen keys on it, plus a larger, more ornate brass one. "That's the master," he said, tapping the brass key. "Opens everything. Office, all the rooms, storage out back. Don't lose it." He talked quickly, his eyes darting towards the door. "People pay cash mostly. Not a lot of people, mind you. You put the money in the safe at night. Code's 198106. The year my daughter was born." He said it flatly, without a hint of sentiment. "Change the sheets if you get a customer. Linens are in the closet. That's about it." "That's it?" I asked, a little surprised by the brevity of the orientation. He was already moving toward the door, grabbing a dusty duffel bag from behind a chair. "It ain't the Hilton, kid. You're a glorified janitor who gets to sleep for free. Most days you won't see a soul. Just you and the wind." He paused at the door, one hand on the knob, and looked back at me. For the first time, he made direct eye contact, and I felt a little jolt. His eyes weren't just tired, they were scared. "Just keep to yourself. Don't go pocking around where you don't need to." And then he was gone. I watched through the grimy office window as he threw his bag into the bed of the pickup, climbed in, and started the engine. It coughed to life with a belch of black smoke. He didn't look back. He just pulled onto the highway and sped away, leaving me alone in a cloud of dust and an unnerving quiet. The first few days were exactly as Art had described. I saw no one. My entire world shrank to the 10 small, musty rooms and the dusty office. The silence was the loudest thing here. At first, I welcomed it. I told myself this was what I needed. No distractions. A perfect writer's retreat. I set up my laptop on the office counter, surrounded myself with my favorite books, and waited for the muse to strike. She never did. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was hungry. It ate sounds. The hum of the refrigerator, the buzz of a fly, the creak of the floorboards. They were all swallowed by the vast, empty stillness of the desert. At night, the wind would pick up, and it didn't sound like a gentle whisper. It howled. It sounded like it was trying to tell you something, a long, mournful story you couldn't quite make out. It would rattle the window panes in the empty rooms, and sometimes, I'd swear I could hear it trying the doorknobs. My routine became a slow, grinding ritual of mediocrity. Wake up, make coffee, stare at a blank Word document for 3 hours. Give up, clean a room that was already clean. Sit in the office and read. Watch the sunset, bleeding orange and purple across the sky. The beauty of it started to feel like a mockery. This grand, cosmic light show, and I was the only one in the audience. The isolation I had craved began to feel like a prison sentence. By the end of the first week, I was going stir-crazy. I had cleaned every room, scrubbed every toilet, and organized the meager inventory of soap and toilet paper a dozen times. On the 8th day, fueled by a potent mix of boredom and desperation, I decided to tackle the one place Art had neglected to mention in detail, the storage room out back. The door groaned open on rusty hinges, revealing a small, windowless space choked with the ghosts of the motel's past. Old, broken furniture was piled high, stacks of yellowed newspapers, a naugahyde chair with the stuffing spilling out. The air was thick with the smell of decay and rat droppings. It was a tomb of forgotten things, and I, the lonely archaeologist, was about to disturb it. I spent the better part of the afternoon dragging things out into the unforgiving sunlight. Most of it was junk. A television with a cracked, convex screen, a set of matching lampshades, both water-stained, a box of warped vinyl records. It was mindless, physical work, and it felt good to sweat, to feel my muscles ache with something other than the tension of sitting still. It was in the far back corner, hidden under a pile of moth-eaten blankets, that I found it. A simple wooden footlocker, the kind soldiers use. It wasn't locked, just fastened with a pair of rusty metal latches. It felt heavy. For a moment, a ridiculous jolt of excitement, a fantasy of finding some old gangster's hidden cash, went through me. I dragged it out into the main storeroom. The latches were stiff, and I had to pry them open with the claw of a hammer I found nearby. They snapped open with a loud, protesting pop. I lifted the heavy wooden lid. There was no money. The chest was packed to the brim with books. Not printed books, but journals. Dozens of them. They were all the same type, simple composition notebooks, the kind you buy at a drugstore, some with cheap leatherette covers, others with the classic black and white marbled pattern. They were stacked chronologically, marked with years on the spine in faded ink, 1975, 1976, 1978, all the way into the late 80s. My writer's curiosity, a thing I thought had died, stirred. These were guest books, I figured. A charming relic from a bygone era. A way to kill a few more hours of this endless, silent day. I grabbed the one on top, its dark green cover soft with age. The year 1975 was written on it. I carried it back to the office, the setting sun casting long, skewed shadows across the gravel lot. I sat down at the counter, the fan oscillating with a rhythmic click. I opened the journal. The pages were filled with a neat, precise, almost calligraphic handwriting. This wasn't the scrawl of 1,000 different travelers. It was one person's work. My disappointment was quickly replaced by intrigue. Who would dedicate so much time to this? I turned to the first entry. The ink was a faded blue. The date was written at the top of the page. And below it, the first sentence, a simple observation that sent a small, inexplicable shiver down my spine. June 12, 1975. The girl in room 4 chews her hair when she's nervous. She's been nervous all afternoon. That first sentence, I don't know, it just snagged on something in my brain. It wasn't a greeting, not a comment on the weather or the long drive. It was an observation, a clinical, detached little note. The girl in room 4 chews her hair when she's nervous. She's been nervous all afternoon. I closed the journal and set it down on the counter. The fan clicked, pushing the same stale air over my face. For a moment, I just stared at the worn green cover. It had to be a coincidence. Maybe the manager was a frustrated writer himself, trying to add a little color to the guest book. A weird hobby, but in a place like this, you had to find ways to kill the deafening silence. I told myself that's all it was. But the silence was winning, and the footlocker was the only new thing in my world. I went back to the storage room and lugged the whole heavy box into the office, setting it down behind the counter. It felt like I'd unearthed a time capsule. I grabbed a different notebook, this one with a black and white marbled cover from 1978. I flipped it open. This was more like what I expected. The pages were a scrapbook of different handwritings, different lives passing through for a single night. July 2, 1978. Saw the Grand Canyon. Pictures don't do it justice. Headed for California tomorrow. The Millers from Ohio. July 5, 1978. Longest drive of my life. This place is quiet. A little too quiet, but the bed's comfy enough. Frank P. The next entry was in a frantic, loopy cursive with a blue ballpoint pen. Don't eat the chili dogs in Flagstaff. Just don't. You've been warned. A very sick man. I chuckled at that one. This was what I'd been looking for. A harmless little window into the past. For the next hour or so, that's what I did. I hopped between the years, reading snippets of anonymous lives. A family vacation, a lonely trucker's pit stop, a young couple's honeymoon. It was a mundane, comforting mosaic. But as I jumped from book to book, I kept seeing it. Like a recurring character in a long-running show. That same handwriting, the neat, precise, almost printed script. It was always in the same faded blue ink, as if written with the same pen for over a decade. And it was never signed, except with a single, sharp, angular letter at the end of the entry. A K. It became a little game. I'd pick up a new journal, say, 1981, and I'd flip through the pages, past the tourist scrawls, looking specifically for K's entries. There was never an introduction, never a hello. Just the observation. April 19, 1981. The man in room 9 talks to himself when he thinks no one is listening. He's rehearsing how he's going to leave his wife. He's not very convincing, followed by the stark, simple signature. K. I felt a prickle of unease. This was different. This wasn't a charming quirk anymore. It was invasive. I flipped to another entry a few pages later. May 3, 1981. The couple in room 7 are at it again. This is their third night. He called her useless. I heard it right through the wall. Then there was a sharp crack. I think she threw the glass ashtray from the nightstand at him. It was quiet after that. Very quiet. K. My hands felt a little clammy. I was no longer just a curious reader. I felt like a voyeur, reading another voyeur's notes. It was sick, but I couldn't stop. The detail was what got to me. It wasn't just things anyone could see. It was private. It was what happened behind closed doors. How could K know these things? The walls were thin, sure, but not that thin. The motel was a single long building, a U-shape around the gravel lot. K would have to be standing right outside their windows, in the dark, just listening. For hours. I grabbed another book, 1982. There he was again, August 29, 1982. The family in room 2 has a young son, maybe 7 or 8. He has a birthmark on the back of his neck, right below his hairline, shaped like a little brown spider. His parents don't seem to know it's there. You can only see it when he bends over to tie the laces on his little red sneakers. He thinks no one is watching. K. A cold dread began to pool in my stomach. The clinical tone, the lack of judgment, the sheer patience it would take to gather these details. This wasn't just a weirdo with a hobby. This was a predator. This was someone documenting his prey. Reading the journals now felt like a violation. Like I was looking at crime scene photos. But the empty office, the oppressive silence of the desert outside, it all pushed me forward. I had to know more. I had to understand what the hell I had found. It was in the 1982 journal that I first noticed the other pattern. I had just read K's entry about the boy with the spider birthmark. It took up a full page. The detail was obsessive, down to the brand of the boy's sneakers. I turned the page, expecting another entry from a different guest, or maybe another of K's observations. But the next page wasn't there. It had been torn out. Not neatly, not like you'd remove a page to write a note on. This was a violent rip. A jagged, furry line of paper remained near the spine, like the page had been grabbed in a fist and torn away with force. My first thought was that it was just damage. These books were old, after all. Maybe a kid had ripped it out decades ago. I kept reading. A dozen or so pages later, there was another entry from K. This one was about a woman staying in room 5. September 14, 1982. The woman drives a station wagon with a bad muffler. She smells of gin and cheap perfume. She's been on the phone all night, crying, begging someone named Michael to take her back. She keeps saying she'll do anything. Anything at all. K. The entry filled the page. The meticulous, sterile handwriting seemed to mock the woman's desperation. I held my breath and turned the page. Ripped out. The same jagged edge. The same feeling of deliberate, angry removal. My heart started to beat a little faster. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a system. I frantically grabbed another journal, 1979 this time, and flipped through until I found K's script. Here it was. A detailed, multi-page description of a group of college kids on a road trip. Their names, the stickers on their van, the songs they played on their radio, the fact that the driver, a kid named Josh, had a habit of stealing sugar packets from diners. It was an encyclopedia of their short stay, and at the end of K's final, exhaustive observation of them, I turned the page. Gone. Torn out, just like the others. I felt sick. I pushed my chair back from the counter, a wave of nausea washing over me. The dusty, quiet office suddenly felt like the most dangerous place on earth. It was a pattern, a ritual. Kay would choose a subject, a person, a couple, a family. He would watch them, learn them, document them with a terrifying, intimate focus. And then, what? What happened on those missing pages? What was the event that had to be physically erased from the record? I knew the answer. I didn't want to know it, but I did. You don't meticulously document a subject and then just let them go. The torn page wasn't an erasure. It was the conclusion, the part of the story that couldn't be written down. My hands were shaking as I reached for one last journal. The cover was a faded, blood red. The spine read 1983. I opened it carefully, the old binding crackling in the dead silence of the room. I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning for that hideously neat handwriting. There, October 5, 1983. A businessman, arrived late in a blue Cadillac sedan DeVille, the paint job dulled by a thick layer of road dust. He's in room 4, smokes thin, brown cigarettes that smell like cloves. He's overweight, sweats constantly, and he whistles. It's the same tune over and over again, a simple, 3-note descending melody. While he gets his luggage, while he uses the ice machine, while he stands outside his room, staring up at the stars. An endless, mindless loop. The entry continued onto the next page. He's still whistling. I can hear it from here. It started to bore its way into my head. It's a stupid, empty sound, and it's filling up all the quiet space. It needs to stop. K. That last sentence wasn't an observation. It was a statement of intent. It needs to stop. My blood ran cold. I knew what was coming. With a trembling finger, I hooked the edge of the page to turn it. It was gone, ripped out, the most violent tear I'd seen yet, a deep gouge that had torn part of the preceding page with it. I slammed the book shut, a small cloud of dust exploding from its cover. I stood up, my legs unsteady. I had to get these things out of here. I needed to burn them, bury them, anything. My sanctuary had become a mausoleum, and I was reading the epitaphs. And then I heard it, faintly, from outside, carried on the dry, rustling desert wind. It was thin, barely there, a ghost of a sound. A whistle, a simple, 3-note descending melody, drifting through the darkness. My breath caught in my throat. The whistling stopped, just like that. One moment it was there, a thin, needle-like sound piercing the desert night, and the next, it was gone. The silence that rushed in to fill the void was 100 times worse. It was heavy, thick, and full of listening. I stood frozen behind the counter, my hands still resting on the blood-red cover of the 1983 journal. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, a wild animal trying to escape its cage. I told myself it was the wind. It had to be the wind, playing a trick on me, whistling through a crack in a window frame or a rusted piece of the motel's sign. That's what a sane person would think. A normal person, but I wasn't feeling normal. The air in the office was stale with the ghosts of Kay's words, with the phantom smell of clove cigarettes and the imagined desperation of people long gone. I didn't move for what felt like an hour. I just listened. I listened for the gravel crunching under a footstep. I listened for the whistle to start again. I heard nothing but the hum of the old refrigerator and the frantic thumping of my own blood in my ears. The sound had come from outside, from the darkness, the same darkness that had swallowed a businessman in a Cadillac, a woman reeking of gin, and a little boy with a birthmark shaped like a spider. Sleep was out of the question. There was no way I could go to my room, lie down, and close my eyes. Every creak of the old building would be him. Every shadow in the corner of my eye would be Kay, watching. I needed proof. I needed to either debunk this whole thing as a massive, sick coincidence, or I needed to know, for sure, that I was sitting in the middle of a monster's hunting lodge. My laptop was on the counter, lid closed. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely make the simple motion of opening it. The screen flared to life, casting my pale, terrified face in its cold blue light. The Wi-Fi here was terrible, a fragile, sputtering thing that barely worked on a good day. But tonight, it connected. The search bar blinked at me, a blank, patient cursor waiting for my fear. Where do you even start? I thought about the torn pages. A violent conclusion. I thought about the people Kay described in such chilling detail right before those pages were ripped out. They weren't described as victims. They were described as subjects. Specimens. I started with the last one. The businessman. The details were sharp in my mind. A blue Cadillac sedan DeVille. 1983. The whistling. I typed, my fingers fumbling on the keys. Businessman missing Route 66 blue Cadillac 1983. I hit enter. The connection sputtered. For a few agonizing seconds, the loading wheel spun. Then, the results populated the screen. Most were junk, old car forums, Route 66 tourism sites. But the fourth link down made my stomach clench. It was from a digital archive of an old Arizona newspaper. The headline was grainy, but readable. Salesman from Chicago vanishes on historic highway. I clicked it. My mouth went dry. The article was dated November 1, 1983. It described a man named Arthur Finch, a 54-year-old paper goods salesman, who was reported missing by his wife after he failed to check into his next hotel in California. He was last seen leaving a diner in western Arizona. His car, a 1981 blue Cadillac sedan DeVille, was found a week later, abandoned in a ditch 10 miles from a small, unnamed motel. No signs of a struggle. His luggage was still in the trunk. Arthur Finch was never seen or heard from again. A low-resolution, black and white photo of the man accompanied the article. He was overweight, with a forced, salesman's smile, standing next to his wife. He looked exactly like the kind of man who would sweat a lot and whistle an endless, mindless tune. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to grip the edge of the counter. It wasn't a coincidence. It was real. Kay hadn't just observed this man. Kay had been the last person to ever see him. That torn page in the journal, it wasn't a missing entry. It was a gravestone. A new, more frantic energy seized me. This wasn't just about one man. How many others were there? How many torn pages were there in that footlocker? My hands flew across the keyboard again. I grabbed the 1979 journal, the one with the college kids. I couldn't remember enough specific details, just a van and a kid named Josh who stole sugar packets. It was too vague. I went for the 1982 journal instead. The memories were fresher, more horrifying. Woman missing station wagon Arizona 1982 Gian. I felt insane typing it, but the details were all I had. The results were a mess. But then I tweaked it. I added, Route 66 feet and the month K had written, September. Bingo, a cold case feature from a Phoenix TV station website, posted years ago. It was a short blurb in a series called, Arizona's Lost. It profiled a woman named Sandra Gable. She'd had a fight with her estranged husband, Michael, packed a bag, and driven off in their Ford station wagon. Her last known location was a gas station receipt from a town 30 miles east of the motel. The article mentioned she had a history of depression and problems with alcohol. She and her station wagon had disappeared without a trace in mid-September 1982. The page K had written about the woman crying on the phone, begging a man named Michael to take her back. The page right before another violent tear. I didn't want to do it, but I had to. The worst one, the one that made me feel the filthiest. The little boy. My stomach recoiled as I typed. Boy missing 1982 Arizona red sneakers. It felt ghoulish, like I was violating a family's grief. But the need to know had become a physical, gnawing hunger. The search results were faster this time. The case was more prominent. The Miller family, a family of 3 on a cross-country trip. Their son, 8-year-old Ethan, had vanished from their motel room during the night. The parents swore they had locked the door. The police found no signs of forced entry. The case had made national news for a week before going cold. And then I saw it. The detail that made my blood run cold and my vision swim. It was a quote from the lead detective, from an interview years later. He was talking about the strange details of the case, the things that haunted him. The strangest thing, the old detective was quoted as saying, was that we had no real description of the abductor. The only unique detail we ever had came from a truck driver who saw the boy at a rest stop the day before. He remembered the kid because he dropped his toy car, and when he bent over to pick it up, the trucker saw a distinct birthmark on the back of his neck. He said it looked just like a little brown spider. I shoved my chair back so hard it screeched against the linoleum and banged into the wall behind me. I stood up, gagging, a sour, coppery taste in my mouth. I stumbled to the office door and stared out into the pitch-black desert. It wasn't a sanctuary. It wasn't a quiet little haven for a burned-out writer. It was a trap, a slaughterhouse. For decades this place, this quiet, forgotten stretch of road, had been Kay's personal hunting ground. The silence I had found so peaceful was the silence of a graveyard. The walls weren't just thin, they were steeped in the memories of unspeakable things. Those journals weren't the musings of a quirky observer. They were a predator's field notes. A logbook of death. Who was K? The old manager? A long-term resident? A ghost? The question hammered at my brain. How could someone operate like this for so long, unnoticed? I looked at my own reflection in the dark glass of the door. A pale, terrified man who had willingly taken the job of gatekeeper to this hell mouth. I was living in a crime scene. A whole museum of them. My panic was a living thing now, a wild bird beating its wings inside my chest. I had to get out. I had to call the police. I had to tell them, what? That I found some old diaries? That a ghost who signed his name with a letter had been killing people for 30 years. They would think I was insane, a crazy writer cracked up from loneliness and heat. But the articles, the proof was on the screen of my laptop. Arthur Finch, Sandra Gable, Ethan Miller, they were real, their pain was real, and the person responsible had documented it all with the cold precision of a biologist studying insects. My eyes darted around the parking lot, the deep, impenetrable shadows beneath the eaves of the motel rooms. The lonely silhouette of the soda machine, the vast, empty desert stretching out in every direction. Kay had been out there. He had stood in those shadows, listening, watching, waiting for the right moment. Maybe he was out there right now. The thought sent a fresh jolt of ice through my veins. I turned back to the room, my mind racing. I had to read more. I had to know everything. I started toward the footlocker, the source of it all, when something cut through the darkness. Headlights. They swept across the gravel lot, a bright, clean rectangle of light sliding across the dirty office wall, illuminating the dusty filing cabinets and the rack of faded postcards. They caught me full in the face, blinding me for a second. I threw a hand up to shield my eyes. A car was pulling in. It wasn't moving fast like a highway traveler looking for a quick stop. It was moving slowly, deliberately, its tires crunching on the gravel with a low, steady sound. It was an old sedan, maybe from the 90s, the paint job a dull, indeterminate color under the single flickering light of the motel sign. It rolled to a stop, not in one of the marked spaces in front of the rooms, but directly in front of the office, its nose pointed right at me. It was almost midnight. I hadn't seen another car for 6 hours. The engine cut out, plunging the lot back into near darkness, the car's frame ticking as it cooled. I stood half-crouched behind the counter, my heart hammering. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, my eyes adjusted to the dim light, and I saw it. Or rather, I saw what wasn't there. The rear of the car was a flat, empty space of rusted metal. There was no license plate. The driver's side door opened with a low groan that seemed impossibly loud in the dead quiet. A single leg emerged, clad in faded denim, followed by the rest of him. He wasn't a hulking monster or a shadowy figure. He was just a man, maybe 50, maybe a bit older, with thinning hair and the kind of slumped shoulders that come from driving too many miles on too little sleep. He wore a plain, dark windbreaker even though the night air was warm. He shut the car door with a dull thud, not a slam, and for a moment he just stood there, his back to me, surveying the empty lot as if it were his own private kingdom. I stayed crouched behind the counter, my breath held tight in my chest. My mind was a screaming chaos of newspaper clippings and Kay's spidery handwriting. This couldn't be him. It was just a late traveler. That's all. A guy looking for a cheap room. A guy who forgot to renew his plates. It happens. I repeated these things to myself, a frantic, silent mantra, but my body wasn't buying it. Every muscle was coiled and ready to spring, my heart hammering a rhythm that felt like a prelude to violence. He finally turned and started walking towards the office. His walk was slow, measured, not tired but deliberate. Each step on the gravel was a distinct, separate sound. Crunch, crunch, crunch. It was the sound of something approaching that has all the time in the world. I forced myself to stand up straight as the little bell above the door chimed, announcing his arrival. Up close, he looked even more aggressively normal. His face was a map of tired lines, his eyes a faded, washed-out blue that didn't seem to hold any light. They scanned the room, the dusty postcard rack, the humming soda machine, the footlocker full of secrets in the corner, before they finally landed on me. There was no flicker of curiosity, no friendly acknowledgement. It was like looking at a camera lens. "Need a room," he said. His voice was flat, a low rumble with no inflection. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir. Just for the one night?" I managed to say, my own voice sounding thin and reedy. I fumbled for the registration card and a pen, my hands shaking. He just nodded, his eyes still on me. He didn't look at the card I pushed across the counter. He reached into the pocket of his jeans and pulled out a small, worn wad of cash, peeling off a couple of 20s and a 10 and placing them on the wood. It was exactly enough for one night, plus the tax. He knew the price. Just need you to fill this out for me, I said, tapping the card. Name, vehicle information. He ignored me. His gaze shifted from my face to the wall of keys behind me. His eyes moved methodically from one hook to the next, past the empty slots for room 1, 2, and 3. Then they stopped. I'll take room 4, he said. The air left my lungs in a rush, as if I'd been punched in the stomach. Room 4, the room of the girl with the blonde hair, the one K had described with such invasive, predatory detail. The room mentioned more than any other in those first few journals I'd read. The sheer, impossible odds of it sent a dizzying wave of nausea through me. This wasn't a coincidence. This was an appointment. My mind raced, trying to find a lie. It's being repaired. The plumbing is out. It's already taken. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that he would know I was lying. He looked at me, his face impassive, waiting. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Room 4, I croaked, my throat as dry as the desert outside. I turned on shaky legs, my back feeling horribly exposed. I reached for the key, my fingers fumbling against the cool brass. The number 4 seemed to mock me. I grabbed it and turned back, placing it on the counter. His hand, calloused and thick, moved to cover it. His fingers were unnervingly clean. He took the key and, without another word, turned and walked out. The bell chimed again, a small, cheerful sound that felt like a scream. I watched through the window as he walked with that same unhurried pace back across the gravel, not to his car, but directly to the door of room 4. He unlocked it, pushed it open, and stepped inside, disappearing into the darkness. The door clicked shut. I stood there for a long time, listening to the frantic thumping in my ears. I didn't know what to do. Call the cops? And say what? A guest paid cash and requested a specific room? They'd laugh me off the phone. I was alone out here. Utterly, completely alone with him. Sleep was a distant, impossible fantasy. I couldn't go to my little room in the back. Not with him just a few dozen yards away. I locked the office door, the deadbolt shooting home with a loud, satisfying thud that offered a sliver of comfort. But I knew it was an illusion. The man in room 4 had an old car with no plates. A lock wouldn't stop someone like that if they really wanted to get in. I backed away from the door, my eyes darting around the small, shabby office that had suddenly become my fortress and my prison cell. My gaze fell on the old, boxy monitor in the corner that was hooked up to the motel's security cameras. The previous manager, a weary old man named Gus, had pointed it out on my first day. Barely works, he'd grunted. Image is crap, but it's something. My hands were clammy as I found the power button. The screen flickered to life with a low hum, displaying a distorted, four-way split of the motel grounds. The image was black and white, grainy, and streaked with static. Camera 1 showed the entrance from the highway. Empty. Camera 2 showed the back of the motel, a stretch of nothing but sand and scrub brush. Camera 3 was aimed at the far end of the lot, near rooms 6 through 8. And Camera 4 was pointed right down the main walkway, covering the office door in rooms 1 through 5. I squinted at the flickering image. There was the man's car, a dark, hulking shape. There was the door to room 4, tightly shut. Everything was still. Nothing was happening. I told myself I was being paranoid, a writer's overactive imagination fueled by old journals and too much solitude. Maybe the guy was just a weirdo. Just a quiet, strange man who liked a specific room. I sat in the worn-out office chair, my eyes glued to the screen. I wasn't going to look away. I was going to watch that door all night if I had to. The minutes crawled by. The hum of the refrigerator filled the room. The static on the monitor danced and fizzed. 10 minutes. 20. An hour. Nothing. He was probably asleep, snoring. I was the crazy one, staring at a fuzzy screen in the middle of the night. I was about to give up, to convince myself this was all in my head, when I saw it. A flicker of movement. It wasn't at the door of room 4. It was in the shadows, near the corner of the building, by the dying ice machine. A shape detached itself from the deeper blackness. It was him, the man from room 4. He wasn't in his room. He had never been in his room. He moved silently into a small, dark patch of the parking lot, an area just outside the main circle of light from the motel sign, a spot where the grainy camera could barely make out his form. And he just stood there. He wasn't smoking, he wasn't pacing, he was perfectly, unnaturally still. His body was a rigid silhouette, and his face, a pale, indistinct blur in the low-quality feed, was turned directly towards the office. Towards me, a cold dread, so pure and potent it was almost a physical force, washed over me. He knew I was in here. He knew I was watching. This was a performance. No, not a performance. A message. I see you. The observer was being observed. He stood there for what felt like an eternity. The clock on the wall crept past 1 a.m., then 2 a.m. He didn't move a muscle. He was just a statue carved from shadow, a patient predator waiting for God knows what. My sanity started to fray at the edges. I was in a fishbowl, and he was tapping on the glass. I had to get out. The thought was a sudden, explosive command. But how? My car was parked right out front, in his line of sight. The back door of the office led to the open desert. I was trapped. Panic gave way to a desperate, frantic need for an answer. There had to be something. Something in the journals that I had missed. A clue, a pattern, anything. I scrambled over to the footlocker where I'd left the older journals, but my gut told me the answers weren't in the past. They were in the now. Where was the most recent journal? The one that would cover the last few weeks, the last few days? I started tearing the office apart, my movements jerky and loud in the tense silence. I rifled through the drawers of the front desk, throwing aside old receipts and takeout menus. Nothing. I checked the filing cabinets. Only tax records from a decade ago. It wasn't here. Had the old manager taken it with him? My desperation mounted. I got on my hands and knees, my heart pounding against my ribs. I ran my hands under the front desk, my fingers sweeping through cobwebs and dust. And then, my hand brushed against it. The edge of a book. It was wedged deep underneath, caught on a stray piece of wood. I pulled, and it came free with a soft tearing sound. It was another one of the same cheap, hardbound ledgers. This one's cover was black, not red. I scrambled back into the chair, clutching it like a holy relic. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely open it. I flipped through the pages. The handwriting was the same. Kay's familiar, precise script. Entries about the weather, about a leaky faucet in room 2, about a trucker who complained about the Wi-Fi. Mundane, normal, and then I got to the last page. The last entry. The ink was different. It was darker, fresher. It looked like it had been written just days ago, maybe a week at most. The words leapt off the page and strangled the air out of my lungs. It wasn't about a guest. It was about my predecessor. The old man was getting slow. Too much forgetting. Too many questions. It was affecting the atmosphere. Time for someone new to watch the place. A writer, maybe. They're good observers. The words on the page felt like they were burning themselves onto the backs of my eyes. A writer, maybe. They're good observers. And in that instant, as if the words themselves had flipped a switch somewhere out on a forgotten utility pole, the world went out. It wasn't a flicker. It was an execution. One moment, the office was bathed in the buzzing, yellow-white light of the overhead fluorescent tube. The next, there was a sharp pop, the sound of a filament surrendering, and then a profound, absolute darkness. The low, comforting hum of the soda machine died with it. The static fizz from the security monitor vanished. The silence that rushed in to fill the void was heavier than the darkness itself. It was the deep bottom of a well silence of the desert at night, a silence so complete you could feel it pressing on your eardrums. My breath hitched in my throat. I didn't move. I couldn't. I was a statue, my fingers still clutching the black ledger, the last sentence seared into my brain. This wasn't a coincidence. A blown fuse doesn't happen at the exact moment you realize you're the next subject in a serial killer's diary. This was deliberate. This was a signal. My eyes, wide and useless in the black, strained to see anything. Slowly, shapes began to emerge from the nothingness, painted in the faint, ghostly gray of the moonlight filtering through the large front window. The counter, the postcard rack, the dark shape of my own car parked out front. Then I heard it, a sound from outside, so small, so insignificant, that in the noise of a normal night I would have never noticed it. But in this dead silence, it was like a gunshot. Crunch, the sound of a single footstep on the gravel lot, followed by a pause. The silence rushed back in, even more menacing now that it had been broken. My heart, which had been frozen mid-beat, started to pound, a frantic, muffled drum against my ribs. I held my breath, listening, praying it was just the wind, or an animal, or my own fraying sanity. Crunch. Closer this time. It was a slow, deliberate sound. Unhurried. The walk of someone who knows you're not going anywhere. The man from room 4. He was coming. Panic, cold and sharp, finally broke through my paralysis. I moved without thinking, pure animal instinct taking over. I shoved the ledger back under the counter, a clumsy, useless attempt at hiding the evidence. My hand fumbled for the deadbolt on the office door. The metal was cold against my shaking fingers. I threw the bolt. It shot home with a loud, satisfying clack that echoed in the tiny room. A second of relief washed over me. Locked. I'm locked in. It was a stupid thought. He had a car with no plates. He was standing outside my door in the middle of the night after turning off the power. A deadbolt wasn't a barrier. It was a momentary inconvenience. I staggered back from the door, my eyes scanning the moonlit shapes in the room for a weapon, for anything. The heavy-duty stapler, too small. The fire extinguisher, too clumsy. My gaze landed on the worn-out office chair. I grabbed it, my hands slick with sweat, and wedged its back under the doorknob. It was a flimsy, pathetic defense, the kind of thing you see in movies right before the monster smashes the door to splinters. Nowhere to run. The back door led to nothing but open desert. He would see me in seconds under the full moon. My car was in the front, right in his line of sight. This was it. This little, dusty cage was where it would happen. And then I did the only thing I could think of. I dropped to the floor, the rough linoleum cold against my palms, and scrambled under the heavy wooden desk. I curled myself into a ball, pulling my knees to my chest, trying to make myself as small as possible. The space smelled of dust and old paper. I pressed my face against the splintery wood, my eyes squeezed shut, listening. The crunching stopped. He was right outside the door. I could feel his presence through the thin wood and glass. The silence stretched. 1 second. 10. A lifetime. What was he doing? Was he just standing there, waiting for me to scream? To break? I stayed perfectly still, concentrating on making my breathing silent, a task that felt impossible as my lungs begged for air. And then came a new sound. A faint, metallic scraping. Scritch. Jiggle. My blood ran cold. It was the sound of a key. Not my key. He was trying a key in the lock. It didn't work. Another jiggle. I heard a low curse, so faint it was more a vibration than a sound. Then, a different noise. A clinking, like several keys being sorted on a ring. He had more than one. Then, the sound I will hear in my nightmares for the rest of my life. A key sliding into the deadbolt lock. A perfect, clean fit. The lock I had just thrown for safety. He had the master key. Of course he had the master key. Gus, the old manager, must have given it to him. Or he took it. This was his place. I was just the temporary observer. There was a soft, grating click as the tumbler turned. The chair I had wedged under the knob was pushed aside with a single, contemptuous shove. It scraped against the floor and fell over with a clatter. The door began to open. It didn't fly open. It swung inward slowly, lazily, on creaking hinges that seemed to be groaning my name. La-oh, la-oh. A long, rectangular slice of pale moonlight fell across the floor, cutting the darkness in two. And in the doorway, a silhouette. It was him. Tall, but not huge. Just a man-shaped hole in the night. He stood there for a moment, letting the silence hang in the air. In his right hand, he held something long and dark. A piece of pipe? A tire iron. As he stepped fully into the room, the moonlight caught it for a second. It was a tire iron, dull and heavy. He shut the door gently behind him, plunging the room back into near total darkness, save for the light from the window. He didn't seem to be in a hurry. He wasn't breathing hard. He moved with a kind of predatory calm that was more terrifying than any rage. His eyes, which I could now see were just dark pits in the gray light, scanned the room. He saw the overturned chair. He saw the chaos on the counter from my frantic search. His gaze swept over the room, patient, methodical. He was taking inventory. I was under the desk, trying not to exist. I was convinced he could hear my heart. It was a wild animal trapped in my chest, trying to batter its way out. Every muscle in my body was screaming at me to run, to fight, to do something, but I was paralyzed. I was a rabbit frozen in the headlights, watching the inevitable approach. His gaze settled on the desk. He knew. Of course he knew. He probably watched me dive under here on the grainy security feed before he cut the power. This was all a game to him. A performance. He took a slow step forward. Then another. The floorboards creaked under his weight. He stopped right in front of the desk, so close I could have reached out and touched his faded jeans. I could smell the faint, sour scent of gasoline and old coffee on him. He was quiet for another eternity, and then he spoke. His voice was exactly as it had been at the counter. Flat, devoid of emotion, a quiet, conversational rumble that made the hairs on my arms stand up. Leo? He said my name, a name I never gave him, a name that wasn't on any registration card because he never filled one out. He knew my name. Hello, Ryder. A small, dry chuckle escaped his lips. It was a horrible sound. It's your turn now, he said, his voice still terrifyingly calm. He shifted his weight and the tire iron in his hand swung gently, bumping against the side of the desk with a dull thump right next to my head. I flinched so hard I thought my neck would snap. Tell me a story. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat was clamped shut. My mind was just a loop of white-hot static. This couldn't be real. It was a nightmare. I would wake up in my small room, the sun would be up, and this would all be a bad dream fueled by old journals. But the smell of dust and the cold of the floor were real. The hulking shadow of the man standing over me was real. Come on, he coaxed, his voice taking on a tone of mild impatience, like a teacher trying to get an answer from a slow student. You're an observer, just like me. I observed them. Now I'm observing you. What do you see, Leo? Tell me the story of the frightened little writer hiding under his desk. He bent down slightly, trying to peer into the dark space where I was hiding. I couldn't see his face clearly, just the outline of his head against the moonlight from the window behind him. I squeezed my eyes shut, a pathetic, childish defense. If I couldn't see him, he couldn't see me. No story? He murmured, a hint of disappointment in his voice. That's a shame. I was looking forward to it. I heard him shift his grip on the tire iron. The sound of calloused skin sliding on cold metal. Well, he sighed, I guess every story has to have an ending. I risked opening my eyes. He was straightening up. He was no longer looking down at me. He was looking at the top of the desk. I saw the corner of his mouth twitch into something that might have been a smile. And I saw the muscles in his shoulder and back tense as he brought the iron bar up, high over his head, the moon catching the silver of it for one long, final moment before it started its descent. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. It's funny, the things you think you'll do in a moment like that. In my mind, in all the movies I'd ever seen, this was the part where the hero fights back or says a defiant last line. My mind was just blank, a sheet of white noise. I saw the glint of the moonlight on the raised tire iron, and all I could think, in a strangely calm, detached way, was, so this is it. This is the end of the story. And then light. It wasn't a gentle dawn. It was a violent, instantaneous flood. 2 white-hot suns erupted outside the front window, washing out the moonlight, erasing the shadows, and turning the man in front of me from a terrifying silhouette into just a guy in a dusty jacket, caught in the glare. His arm, raised for the final blow, froze mid-air. His head snapped toward the window, his face contorted in a mask of surprise and rage. The light was followed a split second later by the sound, a sound so powerful it felt like the world was tearing apart. A deep, guttural roar of a diesel engine, the sound of a big rig that had been pushed too hard for too long, followed by the deafening, gut-punching blast of an air horn that didn't just pierce the silence, it shattered it into a million pieces. The windows of the office rattled in their frames. The whole building seemed to vibrate. That was the crack in his composure. That was my chance. My body moved before my brain did. I don't remember making a decision. It was pure animal instinct, the kind that lives deep down in the lizard part of your brain. With both feet, I kicked upwards, as hard as I could, into the underside of the heavy wooden desk. The impact was jarring. The desk, solid as it was, lifted a few inches and slammed back down with a deafening boom. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The man, already off balance from the lights and the horn, stumbled back a step. The tire iron clattered from his hand, ringing against the linoleum floor. I didn't wait to see what he would do next. I was already moving, scrambling out from under the desk on all fours like an insect. I was a mess of flailing limbs and frantic energy. I pushed myself up, my legs feeling like they were made of jelly, and threw myself at the back door of the office, the door that led to nothing but open desert. The lock was a simple knob. I twisted it, yanked the door open, and plunged out into the chilly night air. The roar of the truck engine was even louder out here. The high beams were still flooding the front lot, casting long, stark shadows behind the motel rooms. I didn't look back, I just ran. The scream that ripped out of my throat wasn't a word. It wasn't even human. It was just a raw, tearing sound of pure terror, a signal to the light and the noise that I was here, that I was alive, and that I needed help. I ran toward the source of the salvation, my feet pounding on the hard-packed dirt and loose gravel behind the motel. I rounded the corner of the building, my lungs on fire, and saw it. A massive Peterbilt, its chrome grille gleaming, was idling in the entrance to the lot, its headlights pointed directly at my office. The driver's side door was open, and a burly figure was silhouetted against the cab light. "Hey, help, over here," I gasped, waving my arms like a madman. My shout seemed to break whatever spell was holding the scene. I heard a frantic scrabbling sound from inside the office, then the slam of a car door from the front parking lot. I risked a glance over my shoulder just in time to see the man from room 4, his face a pale blur in the ambient light, peeling out of his parking spot. There was a spray of gravel, the squeal of abused tires, and his old, plateless car fishtailed onto the highway and disappeared into the vast, unforgiving darkness of the desert. He was gone. I stumbled to a stop, my legs finally giving out. I leaned against the warm hood of the Peterbilt, gasping for air, my whole body shaking uncontrollably. The truck driver, a big man in a flannel shirt and a greasy trucker hat, was jogging toward me. I recognized him. Earl. He stopped here for a soda maybe once a week on his long haul from Barstow to Flagstaff. "Jesus, son, you all right?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He put a big, steadying hand on my shoulder. I was pulling up, saw the lights were all out. That ain't right. Then I saw a shadow move in the office. Figured I'd lean on the horn, see what shook loose. He was in there, I stammered, pointing a trembling finger at the dark office. He had a tire iron. He was going to. I couldn't finish the sentence. The reality of what had almost happened crashed down on me, and a wave of nausea washed over me. "Easy, son, easy," Earl said, his grip firm. "He's gone now. You're safe. I'm calling the cops." He pulled a cell phone from his belt and started punching in the numbers. "Yeah, I need to report an assault. Desert Sunset Motel, Route 66, about 20 miles east of Ludlow. Yeah, the manager's been attacked. Send someone out, quick." The next hour was a blur of flashing red and blue lights, the crackle of police radios, and the methodical calm of people who deal with the worst parts of humanity for a living. 2 sheriff's deputies arrived first, then a more senior-looking officer in a tan uniform with sergeant stripes on his sleeve. His name was Brody. He had a tired, patient face and kind eyes that had seen too much. I sat on the bumper of his patrol car, wrapped in a coarse wool blanket they'd given me, and told them everything. I told them about the ledgers, about the mysterious K, about the descriptions of the guests and the missing pages. I told them about the news articles I'd found, the unsolved disappearances. I told them about the man in room 4, his plateless car, his unnerving stillness, the way he watched me. And I told them about the power going out, the key in the lock, and the tire iron. Sergeant Brody listened without interrupting, his pen scratching against his notepad. The other deputies were already sweeping the office for prints and securing the scene. Earl, bless his heart, stayed until he was sure I was okay, gave his statement, and then rumbled off into the night with a final, reassuring nod. When I was done, Brody looked up from his notes, his expression unreadable. "A writer, huh? And you're telling me you found old journals that basically describe a serial killer's playbook, and then a guy matching one of the old descriptions checks in?" "I know how it sounds," I said, my voice hoarse. "But it's the truth. The journals are still under the counter. You have to look at them." "We will," he said calmly. "We'll take them in as evidence." My deputy found the circuit breaker in the back. It was manually thrown. He also found the tire iron on the floor. "We'll get forensics to look at it. You did good, kid. That truck driver saved your life." He went to confer with his deputies. I just sat there, the adrenaline finally draining away, leaving behind a deep, bone-aching exhaustion. For the first time in hours, I felt a flicker of hope. He was gone. They had evidence. They had my testimony. It was over. After a while, Sergeant Brody walked back over to me. His face had a strange, puzzled look on it. "Leo," he began, and the way he said my name made a new knot of ice form in my stomach. We checked out room 4, just like you said." "And?" I asked, my heart starting to pick up its frantic rhythm again. "And it's weird," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "The room was paid for in cash, for 3 nights. The bed hasn't been slept in. But his stuff is still there. Duffel bag in the corner. A change of clothes on the chair. And his wallet, it was sitting right on the bedside table. I just stared at him, confused. His wallet? Yeah. Brody pulled a plastic evidence bag from his pocket. Inside was a worn leather wallet. He held it up so I could see through the clear plastic. Inside the ID slot was a driver's license. The picture was clear, even in the wash of the flashing lights. It was him, the man who had stood over me with a tire iron. The face was the same. The name on the license was Thomas Weaver, from Ohio. We ran the name, Brody continued, his voice low and serious. Thomas Weaver, a sales representative for a company that sells agricultural equipment. No priors, not so much as a speeding ticket. According to his wife, who we called, he's on a cross-country sales trip. A completely normal guy. He's not, he's just some poor schmuck who picked the wrong motel. My brain refused to process the words. It didn't make any sense. I saw him. I heard him. He called me, the writer. He knew. That can't be right, I whispered, shaking my head. That was him. The man in that picture was the man who tried to kill me. I believe you, Brody said, his voice gentle. But it doesn't add up. Why would a random sales representative try to murder you? And why would he leave his wallet and all his ID behind? He trailed off, looking back toward the office. I followed his gaze. The deputies had finished their initial sweep. The door stood open, a yellow rectangle of light from a portable work lamp they'd set up inside. I stood up, the blanket falling from my shoulders, and walked on shaky legs toward the office. I needed to see it again. The desk, the floor, the place I almost died. Brody followed me in. We'll keep a car posted out here for the night, he said, trying to be reassuring. You're not alone. I barely heard him. My eyes scanned the room. The overturned chair, the scuff marks on the floor, and then my gaze fell upon the front counter. The long, dusty Formica counter where guests checked in, where I'd spent countless hours reading. And my blood ran cold. It was lying right in the center of the counter, perfectly squared with the edges. A place I had looked at 100 times tonight. A place that I know, with a certainty that defied all logic, had been empty just minutes ago. It was a new ledger. Brand new, bound in smooth, black leather, identical to all the others I'd found in the storeroom. It looked pristine, untouched by the dust and decay of the motel. It was open to the first page. I took a stumbling step forward, my breath catching in my throat. Brody hadn't noticed it yet. He was talking on his radio by the door. I reached out a trembling hand and rested my fingertips on the cool leather. On the crisp, clean white page, there was a single entry. The handwriting was instantly, horribly familiar. The same precise, slightly slanted script as all the other entries from K. The ink was a deep, dark black. It looked impossibly fresh, as if it had been written only moments ago. It said, "Preliminary observation. The new subject is quick to react. This will be interesting."